Okay, guys, I'm here with Jerry Epstein from Steindl Lawyers. You might recognise his very unattractive face from a couple of months ago. We talked about some things. And before we start, I just want to say this is zero alcohol beer.
I'll vouch for that.
So we're doing the right thing, but I couldn't come empty-handed to his office. I had to have something. So we're going to talk about the changes to the REIQ standard property contract, which they changed
20th of January 22.
Right. There's a few different changes. There's the pool certificate, smoke alarms, and settlement date. So we're going to talk about settlement date. I think that's the really interesting one.
It is.
So how did it change, mate? Tell us.
Well, under the existing situation, prior to the 20th of January, time is of the essence. If someone did not settle on the due date, they are in default of the contract, which means they could lose the deposit, lose the property, and be sued for damages. It's black and white in Queensland.
Okay, which makes sense, right? Because you've entered into a legally binding
Correct.
contract.
That's right.
So they have now, what have they done now?
What they've done now, because of issues particularly involving bank delays with settlements, people need to discharge mortgages, or incoming banks that are funding a buyer with their purchase monies. Because of delays, there was a number of instances which cropped up where buyers were not ready to settle due to the problems with the banks. With the rising market, sellers were terminating the contract and reselling. So they've changed the contract to provide that either party, if they're not ready on the due date, can, by notice, extend the settlement date by up to 5 business days.
Okay, so there's a couple of things I want to just go work on that. So let's just say Friday afternoon, settlements at 3 o'clock on a Friday. The people who are buying the place load all their property and chattels into a truck.
Yep.
They're on their way, and the other party says, not ready to settle, it's not going to happen today.
Correct. That's what happened.
What recourse have these people got?
The seller?
The people who got all their stuff on the truck on their way.
The person selling the property, ready to sell.
No, the buyer. The buyer's got his stuff on the truck, and the seller says, I can't.
They have no recourse as long as the seller gives notice before 4 o'clock on the day of settlement that says, I'm not ready, I want to exercise my right under the contract to extend up to 5 business days.
Up 5 business days, which is the
means
following Friday.
That's correct.
And these people with their life in the truck have then got to find somewhere to live, rent, store the truck, everything else.
Yes.
And they've got no recourse.
Yes, that's no recourse whatsoever.
It's not the seller's fault, but it's the bank's fault.
Having said that, you could, when you sign a contract, delete that clause so you once again go back. It's not a legislative requirement.
It's just the REIQ.
It's a condition or a clause in the contract. Clauses in the contract can be varied.
Okay, so what's the downside of doing that?
Well, a seller might decide that they want to change the clause and go back to time of the essence, and of course the boot might be on the other foot. That they might be the one whose outgoing bank might not be ready, and suddenly they're in default of the contract. So you've got to walk that fine line as to whether or not you want to change that clause or stick with it. And you could delete the clause or change the clause. Instead of 5 business days, you could say 2 business days or 3 business days. It's not a legislative requirement.
It just sounds like we're allowing the banks to be slack.
Well,
that's what it sounds like.
Well, yes, it is. Having said that, Queensland has been time of the essence. In New South Wales, my understanding is that if someone's not ready on the due date, before anybody can terminate the contract, they've got to serve a notice to complete and give someone up to 14 days to settle. So New South Wales has been living with this issue or this.
But there are other changes, and their contracts are very different. We can't be gazumped. They can down there. There's lots of things.
Of course. But the bottom line is, if you've got a seller or even a buyer with their goods all packed in a truck ready to go, and the other party's not ready, they've got up to 14 days after, not the settlement day, but after a notice to complete is served.
In there, but here it's still 5.
You've got to give the party that's not ready has to serve notice before 4 o'clock, I think it is, on the day of settlement, exercising that right to extend.
Okay,
and you can extend for 1 day, 2 days, any number of times, but up to a maximum.
If I was buying a house and you were acting on my behalf, what would you advise me to do?
That's it. If you're buying a house I'd probably, given the current market, I'd probably tell you to leave that clause as is, because prices are increasing all the time. If your incoming bank is not ready, you don't want to lose the property.
All right, so the bottom line is, whatever they decide, they've got to have legal advice.
Absolutely.
Talk to your solicitor and know the pros and cons of it, because it can go either way, right?
You could vary the clause and go back to time of the essence, and it could come back and bite you on the backside, because you or your bank may not be ready, and suddenly your buyer, your seller could terminate on you, and you've lost the deal.
All right, interesting. That's one of the changes. We'll talk more later on. Thanks, guys.